Hi there, welcome to Floating in Books. Today I have another wrap up for you because I did a lot of reading this summer. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. This summer I went on a trip and I had a lot of time on my hands, so I already read 10 books since I last spoke to you, which is a lot more than I usually read, and there's a reason for that. Namely this thing, so let me tell you all about it. So yes, I read 10 books in the time span of roughly a month, which is a lot more than I usually do. I did have a couple of weeks of summer vacation off of my job, and I did some traveling. And because I knew I was going to be traveling and I wanted to make it as lightweight as possible, you could say, I knew I wouldn't be able to bring a lot of books. And I have another one of those trips planned out for next year. At least it's not planned yet, but the plan is to do like a larger trip where I'm just going to be away for a couple of weeks. And the way it fit in my brain, this trip was like mild trial run. That was the vlog you last saw. And I was like, I still have a gift voucher from Christmas from work for like a media electronics sort of store we have here in the Netherlands. And it had been my birthday. I was like, I'm going to treat myself to an e-reader. And this thing has changed my life. That's a very bold claim, but it definitely has. In winter, I always struggle to read at night or when it gets darker, and so I tend to read less than I do if it's summer and we have a lot more daylight. But because this has the built-in light, it's a lot easier on the eyes to read at nighttime, so that made it really easy. And of course, it allowed me to bring a ton of books with me while on vacation. So I read 5 of these books, so half just in the time span of the 10 days that I was away. So yeah, this e-reader, I just got a Kobo. This is the Clara Color. So it does have, the battery is low. I need to charge it. But it does have the color edition, so you can see like what all the covers of the books actually look like on the e-reader. It even has the ability to like highlight stuff. This is just a very sort of bog standard e-reader, and it has really added to my reading experience, you could say. So it's now a lot easier for me to pick up a book again late at night or before going to bed, because I wasn't reading a lot anymore before going to bed because I just have to sit awkwardly to angle the book right so I can see very well. And with this, it just made life so much easier. So that definitely attributed to the 10 books. But I read 3 physical copies as well. So let me talk to you about these 3 physical copies first, and then I'll talk to you about what I read on my e-reader. The first physical copy I read is a book that was gifted to me for my birthday this year. This is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors, and this is the second book by this author that I've read this year. Her first novel, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, is something I read in the springtime, and I enjoyed it okay, but I felt that a lot of the characters in that book were a little vapid and just not really my kind of people, and this story therefore really spoke to me. It is about 4 sisters. One of them has passed away, and it's about their level of dysfunction, and we follow each of the remaining sisters, how she deals with grief and the dynamics within their family, and I thought this was a lot more engaging. I definitely read it in just a couple of days, and I thought this was a lot better than the first one I read by this author. I ended up giving this 4 stars in my Goodreads because I did really enjoy it. If you want, like, it's sort of like sisters, but they all have their own individual personalities as well, and I felt that really came to the forefront, but they also interact in a really cool way, I feel. So they each have their own flaws and their little demons, and I really liked how none of these girls were super perfect, and yet they were just trying to help each other through. When I returned from vacation, I picked up The Poppy War. This is the first book in this series by R.F. Kuang, and I had read Yellowface. I listened to it on audio last year, and R.F. Kuang is one of those authors who's been raved about by so many people, and this series in particular. In this story, we follow a girl called Rin, and she, her only way out of a very dire existence, is to apply for an entry-level exam to go to some prestigious school. She gets in, then she has her challenges there, and then she, while still a student at this school, is forced to participate in this war. And this had so many people raving about it, and I felt a little bit disappointed about this in the end. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I hope this series improves as we go along. I just felt that there were too many sort of side characters that we then lost track of, and then they like suddenly appeared again, and there were a lot of like convenient plot points. I definitely felt that this story could have done with better pacing. I just felt we got a lot of her like preparing for this exam, and then she got in, we get a lot from her first school year, and then all of a sudden she's a third year, and we have no clue what happened to her in the meantime. So in terms of knowing what this character is all about and how she like thinks about things and really being in her head, I felt that that was something that this story didn't do very well. So a lot of things seemed to happen for no reason, and that to me really set this back. It was just event after event after event, and I know that one of the things that a lot of people think is really good about this story is how it is actually based on true historic events of Chinese history, and like all of those stereotypes are in there. But after like at the 2/3 point of this book, I really felt like the trueness of the history was like focused on too heavily, and it really took away from the story. So I don't mind it if an author uses real life inspiration to write a story, but this became so obvious that it was just feeling a little too try hard, and it didn't develop the story at all. I felt the author could have made slightly different changes in how to write this story down while still keeping those historical elements, and for me that just meant this wasn't as great. It starts off as this really nice fantasy series, and then it becomes almost like historical fiction, which was a really weird take. And this story also dragged a lot. A lot of the exciting stuff happened in the last 50 to maybe 100 pages, but after that war starts, we get like hundreds of pages of absolutely nothing. It's just her walking patrols, and we don't know what she's up to, and we don't know anything else that's going on in this world either. So I felt that there were the story mentioned side characters going on to different quests and like going other places, but we never followed them. We were always stuck with Rin, who was stuck in one place, holding lots of grudges that made absolutely no sense. So for me, this just could have been better. I did enjoy it, which is why it's 3 stars. 3-star read for me. Like, this is good. I would recommend this to people if you wanted to read it as well. I'm not saying don't read it. It wasn't terrible. I just, based on all the hype this got, I wanted a little bit more. And the final physical copy that I read was Rouge by Mona Awad. And this was a similar thing to Poppy War. I wanted more. This was a 3-star read for me. I read Bunny before this, and that was also something that I was like, yeah, I see what you're trying to do here, but this is so already done better by other authors that I've read. And I felt that way about this book as well. So what drew me in about this is that Rouge is set in, like, it takes place in California. Belle, our main character, has just lost her mom, and Belle is obsessed with skincare. She has a very extensive skincare routine, and this was instilled by her mom. So her mom was obsessed with beauty and like being a true woman and those kind of things, and we get little glimpses of Belle throughout her life and how she lived with her mom when she was younger. They had a bit of a falling out, it seems. We already know this at the start of the story, and at the same time, Belle is sort of sucked into the strange world that her mother occupied as well. It feels like almost like a cult based around beauty and like your journey, and like a lot of the speak that you hear surrounding wellness culture is very much woven into this story, but at the same time you know that something is wrong. It's almost like the people she meets are like vampires of some kind, and they definitely, these beauty treatments aren't regular beauty treatments that she's getting. She loses memory, she doesn't know where she's at, she doesn't remember people's names or what she was supposed to be doing. So this is definitely like, it is a weird story, you could say, and I normally really like weird stories. I just felt that this was trying too hard at some points, and then Same with Poppy War. There was a lot in the middle where it was just a lot of memories and we didn't really know what was going on. And then all of a sudden, everything is brought together in like the last 50 pages of the story. So this was, even though it was only like 350 pages, I felt there was too much that was supposed to be build up, I'm sure. But because of all the flashbacks that took you out of the current story, it just served as filler, in my opinion. So I wanted to love this more. The premise sounded really, really promising, very gothic-y and dark, yet, you know, this focus on beauty, which of course with me having a makeup channel is something I'm interested in. So I definitely felt that this could be something that I really enjoyed. I just felt that the characters weren't fleshed out enough. It was a little bit like tropey in that sense, and I kind of saw the clue coming at the end. Like, it was very obvious where things were gonna go. And that's something that I felt was a bit of a letdown here. Plus, the writing of this. Some people, like, I saw reviews, people praising this into the high heavens for how it's written. Well-written stories have sentences of different lengths. This author uses 7-word sentences the entire book. The only time we get a longer sentence is when she throws in skincare names, like beauty product names. And to me, that was like, it felt very sort of staccato, and that sort of took me out of the story as well. So for me, really interesting premise, but I felt it wasn't fleshed out well enough. So that brings me everything that I read on my e-reader. So that just shows you, with 7 books read on my new e-reader, that it was a good decision for me to get one. The first book I read was on my trip. This is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I've heard so much hype about this book as well. Also, like a lot of literary critics who love this story. But I very quickly realized as I was reading this that you need to read all 4 books to get the whole story. And I was so bored reading the first one, and I'm just not invested in these characters enough that I would want to read the rest of it. So that's why for me it's 2 stars. The very first chapter sets you up for thinking like something has happened to one of our main characters. We know that in the first chapter, but we don't get the resolution for what's going on with this main character within the first book. We only get the life story of these 2 women in like rural Italy in like the 1950s until like end of childhood, like going to college age. So it's like the first 18 years of their lives, and that first chapter takes place when they are mature women. So I was like, if I have to read another 3 novels just to know what that first chapter is about, I'm terribly sorry, but that's just not where I want to go. So for me, this story was beautifully told. I liked a lot of the sort of like insight into history that you got of this like rural town and how things worked. I really enjoyed that aspect to it. But to me, the friendship just didn't feel very solid between these 2 characters. And I just felt that it was very opportunistic at some point. I just didn't feel like these characters were really like friends at all. They were more like enemies who happened to like make the best out of a bad situation, more so than anything else. So for me, My Brilliant Friend, as beautiful as the writing was, and there were some really interesting like topics that it touched upon, I don't want to have to read the rest just to know what's going on in that first chapter. So for me, it was 2 stars. And then I decided to take a gamble, because with my e-reader, I now just have the Kobo Plus subscription, so I can read books on it unlimited. And one of the books that I wanted to read, but that I didn't really want to shell out a lot of money for, because it was a romance novel, I was like, it's only $8.99 through the Kobo store, so I can just try it. And it was by Emily Henry, and it's Beach Read. So Emily Henry is one of those authors that blew up online for doing great romance stories. And I'm not a lover of romance, so for me to give this 3 stars, that says something. This was actually really enjoyable. I enjoyed this story. Did I see where it was going to go? Did I know they were going to end up together? That was obvious from the start. So for me, that's always the problem with romance. Like, you know things are going to work out in the end. So For me, this is just a little too predictable for that reason. So for me, the Emily Henry Beach Read story was really enjoyable indeed, but I didn't really think, like, it's a romance novel. It's a fun romp. It's no more than that. We follow two main characters here. The first main character is a woman who's just lost her father, and when he dies at his funeral, she finds out that there was another woman in his life. So her complete world has been shattered, and she is a romance novelist herself, and she just has no inspiration for this new book. So what she does instead is she inherited her dad's cabin on this lake somewhere upstate somewhere, and she goes there and to write this novel, essentially. Her goal is to go there for the summer and have that novel done. And then who happens to be her next door neighbor? Her arch nemesis from college. So that already sets the scene. This was fun. I thought the characters were pretty well done. I especially liked the lady with the bookstore, who happens to be his aunt, I think, who kind of like sets them up to be in this book club, and like they're both there. It was really funny. So it definitely had its moments, but romance is never going to score very high for me. The next book I read also on vacation is The Night Raven by Sarah Painter. This was one of the free books I got on Kobo Plus just to check it out. And this was pretty fun. It was an urban fantasy story about a girl who's part of this like crime family in London. There are several crime families, and each family has like a certain magical ability, but their abilities have been waning for some time. And her uncle is like really high up in this organization. He's like the head honcho, you could say. And she moves to London after things not going very well for her private investigations job that she was doing up in Scotland. And she is then like pulled into this world of this crime family that her parents have always tried to take her out of. So that sounded really interesting, and that was what was really enjoyable. It was just, the book was too short. Like, there was so much more world building that could have happened with this story that I felt that where, for instance, in Poppy War, we get these weird cuts and we don't know what the story was going. This had, like, no characterization whatsoever. It was all plot. It was just one thing happening after another, but there was little to no retrospection or inner monologue of how things work. So I felt that this was a bit like, it was like published fan fiction. That's how it felt. So I only gave it 2 stars. But again, it was a really fun book to read. And this is a pretty extensive book series, and they are all on Kobo Plus from what I could see. So if I can read them for free with my subscription, I might read the second one as well. I do have it saved on my e-reader, but I probably won't be reading these like back to back because I need a bit more of a challenge. The next story was a 4-star read for me, so super, super successful. This is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. And I do have this as a physical copy at home, and I'd never gotten around to reading it, but because I read quite a few like short, easy, fun reads, I was like, I want to dig into something a little bigger. And this is I think in paper it's like 500 pages or so. And I breeze through this. Such an enjoyable story. So The Invisible Life of Addie Larue is about a girl who lives in like rural France, I think 18th century, like 17th century. I don't remember the century well enough. And she is forced to marry someone she doesn't want. So she runs out of her parents' house in her wedding dress, goes into the forest, and makes a deal with a demon, a devilish sort of god who gives her eternal life. She cannot die. But her problem is that the minute she talks to people, they wake up the next day, they walk out of the room, they no longer know who she is. They no longer know who she is. And this was a very enjoyable story because she lives through all these ages. We get glimpses of her life throughout these different time periods and how she like tries to manage building an existence for herself while nobody remembers her, until she meets Henry at a bookstore, and Henry remembers. So that makes him super duper interesting to her, and of course they strike up a friendship, a romance even at some point. And of course, everything happens for a reason. But Addie she's savvy. I liked her. She had a bit of spunk about her. She really was a little bit headstrong. This devil came to like visit her because the deal is that when she wants to give up and die, then he'll take her soul. And that's sort of like part of his deal. And he comes and checks in at first every year and then later every couple of years to see how she feels. And she's like trying to like dupe him, and she's super sassy about the whole thing. So I thought that was very enjoyable. Even though there was a bit of romance, I didn't mind it in this case because it was like this really novel experience for her to be in a relationship with someone that still remembered her. So that was a really nice, fun twist. And I wish this book had a sequel coming. Apparently V.E. Schwab has said there won't be any sequels to this, but it definitely has an open ending that could allow it to. So this was one I really enjoyed, 4 stars. And then something that really surprised me. I didn't expect to like this as much as I did. This is by Trisha Levenseller. It's the daughter of the Pirate King. And this is sort of like YA-esque fantasy Pirates of the Caribbean, but our main character has the abilities of a mermaid. It was really, really fun. This was so fun. It's essentially about a lady who lets herself be captured by pirates because her dad is the Pirate King and he wants to know, like, get a piece of some sort of map or something. There's this crew that she interacts with. It's a very fun romp. I read this in a single sitting while traveling home. There was a bit of a delay, so I managed to read a 300-page book in just a couple of hours, so that was lovely. And I really enjoyed it. I was really invested in this story. And how it all came together. I really enjoyed the way this book came about. Was it just a fun romp? Is this like a super exciting story? No, but there is, I believe, a second book in this series, which is also, again, on my e-reader, so I will be reading that at some point too, because this was just really enjoyable. There's like scheming and little tricks, and then we don't really know exactly what she can do, but she sort of shows her abilities as time goes on. And then there's this like whole rivalry, and then she like doesn't know her dad as well as she thought she did, and there's intrigue, and I thought this was pretty well done for what it's trying to be. I feel that this is a very unpretentious book that knows it's just a fun book, and it commits to that and does it really well. Next up was by Jennifer Marie Thorne, Diavola, and this I read when I came home. And it was very unexpected. I did not expect, I had no expectations going into it. I just thought the cover was cool. That's why I read this, and it was on Kobo Plus, and it was like, I might as well. Turns out this is a perfect fall read, or like end of summer read, because it's a horror story. It's a like locked room ghost story kind of thing in Italy, in like Tuscany, in a like during a family vacation. On the one hand, we have the family vacation with a very dysfunctional family, and we follow the black sheep in the family as our main character, and at the same time, we get a lovely ghost story. So, I thought this was very well done. It was very enjoyable. I did feel that the ending was a little bit too convenient, so that's why I knocked it down a star, but it was 4 stars for sure. If you're looking for a good horror story this fall, or maybe like post-summer, because that's definitely sort of like the setting I have in my brain, because like it's really nice weather in this story, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to read it when it's super gloomy and dark outside and raining the entire time, unless that's your cup of tea. But I just really loved the interaction, and then like the whole ghost story element to it. I really enjoyed it. And finally, I did a bit of a reread. This was on my list to start this reread, because one of my favorite urban fantasy series is Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich. It's the Peter Grant series. That's what the whole series is called, but the first book is Rivers of London. And I read this first book 10 years ago. Fun fact, during my travels this summer, I was in Copenhagen, and guess where I picked up my first Ben Aronovich Rivers of London story? In Copenhagen. I actually passed the bookstore where I picked up that book 10 years ago. So I've been reading these pretty much as they were coming out. And I remember reading some of them out of order. So I was like, I want to restart the series because I think it's going to be a while until we get a new book. And this way I can like tide myself over until we get another one and like really be up to speed. I had forgotten so much about this first book. I gave it 4 stars upon reread. These are fast-paced, action-packed. There's magical elements to it. There's mythology in it. It's set in London, and it's got police investigations. So the way I've always explained this is like Harry Potter meets Luther and Sherlock Holmes. Because we have the banter of like Sherlock Holmes and Watson, but then we have these sort of like modern police procedures of like a Luther, and we have lots of gruesome murder cases in these stories, and like a lot is happening. And like there's like nods to like London underworld and all that. And at the same time, it's about someone who learns to do magic and who needs to like find out what magic can and cannot do. So for me, this has always been a super enjoyable series, and I was not disappointed upon the reread. In the first story, we meet Peter Grant for the first time as he is, like, I think, how should I say it? He's like watching over this area where a murder has taken place in Covent Garden. And it's really funny because I've been to London so many times now that I know exactly where it's at. Like when they say like Northwest here and there, I'm like, oh, that's where that store is located. It's like terrible. And he meets a ghost who gives him information. And then it's like, oh, wait. And he has just graduated like his trial area in the police, and he has to go into like his actual career track, you could say. And then he is accepted into a special part of the London Metropolitan Metropolitan Police, who specialize in all the weird stuff, as everybody else in the police corps actually calls it. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. What I didn't remember is how much time passes in this story and how much magic he already learns in the first book. In my brain, he didn't learn the magic until book 2 or 3. But apparently in the first book, there's already things he can do. So there's a lot of like storylines that I feel were already started in the first book that are also really important in the later books, and I hadn't realized that. So for me, this was, again, super enjoyable. If you've never read Rivers of London, I highly recommend you do. And without further ado, those were the 10 books that I read in the past 5-6 weeks or so. So that was a lot of reading that I've done. I definitely will be slowing down again because I'm back at work, so that's not going to give me as much time to read. But yeah, I definitely think that having the e-reader is going to be essential in me to like just allow me to read even more, because it's easy to take with me on the train when I go visit my parents, or to read at night, as I mentioned. So it has opened up a whole new world of reading for me, for sure. So thank you so very much for joining me here today. Thumbs up this video if you liked it, and I will be back with a new video next week on this channel. See you then. Bye bye.